Welcome to Merger Network's course on buying a business. Today we're going to talk about preparation, the stuff you need to do up front before you start looking for a business. Let's get started. Why is preparation important? Why not just go out and start looking for a business? Well, there are several reasons. The first is, if you don't prepare, you can miss out on deals. Let's say you find a business that you really want to buy, but you haven't got your financing lined up. Well, if there are other buyers, you may be out of luck. The seller will negotiate with them while you're out trying to raise money. You can also pay too much. If you haven't studied the market, you won't know whether the asking price is high or reasonable, and you won't know how aggressive you can be when you negotiate with the seller. You can also make mistakes. For example, if you wait to the last minute to hire a lawyer or accountant, you may not have time to do a proper search, and you could hire the wrong people. Lastly, if you're not prepared, you can waste a lot of time looking at the wrong types of businesses. For example, if you know you need seller financing, you won't waste time looking at businesses that don't offer it. Okay, now let's look at how to prepare to buy a business. First, choose a type of business. Next, decide on locations. Research prices. Line up financing. Select advisors. Prepare for sellers. Now, I'll go through each of these items in detail, and I'll start with choosing a business. The ideal business for you is one where you have several years of work experience. This is important because if you already know the business, you won't make as many mistakes. It's also a business where you can utilize your personal strengths. If you're a great salesman, choose a business where personal selling is important. If you're highly creative, choose a business where creativity is important. Now, make a list of the businesses that meet these criteria. Try to be as specific as possible. Don't just say restaurants. Say what type of restaurant. Fast food? Fine dining? How many seats? With or without a liquor license? Franchised? What if you don't have several years of work experience? What if you just got out of college? Then I advise you to hold off on buying a business until you get some experience. For one thing, it will be very hard for you to get financing without a track record. For another, running a business takes a lot of skill, and if you're starting from zero, the business could fail. And this is true even if you're buying a business with a management team that is willing to teach you the business. You won't be able to manage them if they know more than you do. Next, you need to decide about locations, where the business can be located. If you're going to be running the business yourself, you have to decide whether you're willing to move. If you're not willing to move, how far are you willing to commute? Get out a map and make a list of the towns that are within your commuting radius. If you are willing to move, make a list of the places that you'd consider moving to, and make sure to consult your spouse. If you're not going to be running the business, you have a lot more options, but remember that you're going to have to visit the business on a regular basis, so you may not want to buy a business that's very far away. Unless, of course, it's in some place like Florida or Arizona that you want to visit anyway. One last thing. Some businesses, such as websites and home-based businesses, can be relocated very easily. You might want to look at these businesses if you don't want to move. Next, you need to do some research on prices. Specifically, you need to find out what businesses are selling for in the industries you're targeting. The easiest way to do this is by visiting some business for sale websites and looking at the prices. Make sure they're similar to the type of business you want to buy. For example, if you want to buy a fast food restaurant, look at fast food restaurants. Don't look at coffee shops and fine dining restaurants. And don't worry about the locations. It's good if they're in the locations you're targeting, but not necessary. Now, what's the range of prices? What's the average? If you want to go the extra mile, look at multiples. What are prices as multiples of sales and cash flow? Okay, you should now have a pretty good idea about what it's going to cost you to buy a business. Now, let's figure out how to come up with the money. Start with your own savings. How much of your savings are you willing to invest in the business? You can use the money in an IRA or a 401k to buy a business. It's a bit complicated. You need to set up something called an ERSOP. That's spelled ERSOP, but it can be done. Don't invest all of your savings. Make sure you hold something back in case things don't work out. How much should you hold back? Enough to pay your living expenses for 6 to 12 months. That should be enough time to find another job if the business fails. And talk to your spouse. Get them to sign off in advance. If you're going to be selling stocks to raise money, hold off for now. Don't sell until you actually need the money for a deposit or a closing. Okay, now let's look at how much you can raise through personal loans. Try to borrow as much as you can when you buy a business. Why? Because it's safer than using your savings. Keep your savings for emergencies. If you own a home, you may be able to get a home equity loan. It depends on the size of your mortgage and the current value of your home. Talk to a mortgage broker to find out how much you can borrow. If you can get a home equity loan, borrow the money now while you still have the income from your current job. Don't tell the banker that you're going to use the money to buy a business, because he may turn you down. If you have a life insurance policy, you may be able to borrow against the cash surrender value of the policy. This only works with whole life policies. You can't borrow against a term insurance policy. If you own stocks and bonds, you may be able to get a margin loan. Call your stockbroker and find out if you qualify, and if you do qualify, how much you can borrow. With a margin loan, don't borrow as much as you can. Play it safe. Make sure you can withstand a 50% drop in the value of your securities. You may be tempted to raise money by taking cash advances on your credit cards. Don't do it. It's very expensive money, and the rates will go way up if you miss a payment. Okay, now let's look at seller financing. Seller financing is when the seller provides financing for the sale of a business, usually by taking back a note from the buyer. The percent financed varies, but it's usually in the range of 40 to 60% for smaller businesses. It's a much smaller amount, or nothing at all, for larger businesses. The note is usually paid off over 5 to 15 years, and there are all kinds of repayment schedules. Balloon payments are very common. The note is secured by the assets of the business. Some sellers will ask you to put up your house as collateral as well. Don't do it. Some sellers will ask you to personally guarantee the note. Don't do that either. The assets of the business provide sufficient security. You should also insist on something called a right of offset, which protects you against seller misrepresentations and fraud. For example, if you buy a business and discover that the value of the inventory was overstated because a lot of it was obsolete, you can offset your loss against the note. There are a lot of other ways that you can raise money to buy a business. You can borrow money from your family and friends. You can find a business partner who will contribute his own capital. You can get a business loan from a bank. You can get a loan from a peer-to-peer lending site. Or you can find a private equity or venture capital firm to provide financing. I don't have time to cover all of these options right now. I'll discuss them in detail later in the course in the session on financing. Okay, let's talk about advisors. At a minimum, you need to choose an attorney and accountant. You don't need to hire them now. Wait until you find a business. But you need to figure out who you're going to use. You need the accountant for financial due diligence. You want him to review the seller's books and verify that the numbers are accurate. You also want his advice on the tax impact of the purchase terms. The attorney negotiates changes in the purchase documents, which are normally prepared by the seller's attorney or broker. He also performs legal due diligence, such as reviewing the seller's contracts and verifying the seller's title to property. Make sure you get people with actual deal experience who have a good track record for closing deals. Lots of deals blow up because advisors don't know what they're doing. Don't use your current accountant or attorney if they don't have deal experience. Lastly, identify other advisors what you're going to need. For example, if you're buying an oil company, you'll probably want a petroleum engineer to look at the seller's reserve reports. Okay, you're almost done. There's one last thing that you need to do. Prepare for sellers. Why? Because sellers need to qualify you. They need to know you have enough money to pay for the business. They need to know you're not a crook. They need to know you're competent to run the business. And they're going to ask you a lot of this information anyway, so you might as well get it ready now. What do you need? Start with a personal financial statement. Provide the same information that you'd provide to a bank. Assets, debts, income, loan payments, and so on. Next, prepare an updated resume. Include your education, work experience, and anything else that you think is relevant. Next, prepare a list of personal references, people who will vouch for your character and your competence. Lastly, check your credit report. Do you have a good credit score? Does it show any bankruptcies, tax liens, or judgments? If your credit is bad, it will be very difficult for you to get seller financing, and it could be a deal breaker, even with an all-cash deal. Now you know what you need to know about planning and preparation. The next session in this course will be about the search process. I'll discuss all of the techniques that you can use to find a business, including using business for sale websites, working with business brokers and finders, and contacting business owners directly. I hope you can join us. Until then, thanks for watching.